You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode number 34 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Today I'll be sharing a conversation with Sarah B. I've known Sarah for about 10 years, give or take, and she has been in the Bay Area Fellowship for quite a while and then moved away. And it was great to reconnect with her on Zoom to record this episode. Among the many things that we talked about, including retreats, higher power, intimacy, and sexual avoidance, we also covered mental illness, and specifically dissociative identity disorder, which Sarah suffers from. So this disorder is usually abbreviated DID and used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personalities, and it's usually a reaction to trauma in order for a person to avoid bad memories. And we discussed that in our conversation. Because of that, I wanted to read from the SAA Green Book, and this is in the chapter Our Life in Recovery, the section Outside Help, and this is on page 34 that I'll be reading. First paragraph and last paragraph. Many of us have sought therapy in order to help ourselves heal from deep-seated emotional and psychological wounds, including sexual abuse and trauma. We may have suffered grave losses associated with our addictive behaviors or past abuse, and our grief over these losses may seem overwhelming, or we may find that we need professional support in coping with the effects of sexual trauma. We are free to seek whatever professional help we need in order to aid our grieving and our healing process. As we grow in recovery, we discover what we need in order to take care of ourselves, and giving ourselves permission to meet those needs. Outside resources are available as part of our self-care. We also grow in our willingness and ability to reach out beyond the SAA program, enjoy a greater connection with people, and engage with life. We gain not only freedom from our disease, but the freedom to be at home in the world. And I picked out these readings due to our conversation over Sarah's DID. One of the things before cutting away to the conversation that I wanted to mention is that my cats were out in full force. And usually I try to be able to mute the microphone whenever they're making noise, but they had other plans, wrestling and other things around where I'm recording. So occasionally that crept into the conversation that I had with Sarah. Anyway, it was a great conversation, and I am hoping that you will enjoy it. And I'm going to turn the episode over to that conversation right now. Here it is. All right. Well, welcome, Sarah, to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. It's been so long since I've actually been able to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, I used to be part of the Bay Area Fellowship.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and where are you currently?
I'm in Portland.
Awesome.
Oregon. I know there are multiple.
Yeah. So when I got an email from you looking for information on what our retreat does, we have a form for re-entry, and you were asking about that. And it's like, I remembered that at our retreat, probably 2017-ish, when I started talking about the podcast, that you were one of the people that was gathered around in the group, really excited about doing a podcast for SAA.
Yep,
And
I remember the table we were sitting at.
Yeah. And at the time, I think you were living in Chicago.
Yes. Wow, good memory. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at that time, I was completely oblivious to what Zoom is and how to do remote recording. So I know you said you wanted to be a guest, but it's like, how are we going to make this work? And so, and now with this technology, it's super easy. So yeah, I asked you on that email if you wanted to be a guest on the podcast. You're like, fuck yeah.
I know. I was so exactly. I was so excited. And then going and looking at all that you've already done, it's just incredible. Like, oh, this has been going for a while. And I'm just, I don't know. It feels, I'm just excited. I'm proud. I'm proud that you're in the fellowship. I'm proud of what you've done. It's really awesome. Really awesome.
Yeah. So way back then, that's kind of when the idea first came about, and it took us a while to vet how we were going to do it, go through the traditions and try to figure out how we're going to make this safe for everyone. So even though you and I are looking at each other on Zoom and it's recording, the only thing that's going out is the audio. So it enables safety and anonymity for everyone. But yeah, it took a few years, and finally at the beginning of this year, I said, screw it, let's just go ahead. I had a couple of episodes recorded. I think I recorded them back in 2019 and have been waiting for this to line up, for that to line up. And I am just going to keep waiting and waiting and waiting, or I can just upload it and go from there. So yeah, the first couple were a little bit iffy, but learning the entire process has been a gift and helping me let go of perfectionism.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah. So anyway,
I've been sharing the links that you sent me for all the podcasts with my fellow
cool.
Here, all the meetings. What? Really? Oh my gosh, everybody's so excited. So thank you for doing this.
You're very welcome. So yeah, I usually start off with asking about the three circles. What is in your inner, middle, and outer circle? And can you go ahead and share that?
Yeah. So my inner circle is anonymous sex, unprotected sex, hurting myself during masturbation, and willfully harboring thoughts of suicide. And something that I was saying to you before we start recording, I have a dissociative disorder. So under stress, my memory gets shaky, and this is exciting but stressful what we're doing right now. And I knew that you talked about the circles, and I thought about pulling them out, and I made the decision not to. I get emotional. Part of my recovery is being present and showing up just as I am, and trusting myself, trusting higher power, trusting you. So the inner circle, I say at most meetings, so I have it down. Middle and outer, I'll be able to touch on some of the stuff, but I'm not going to remember it all. And I'm choosing to not remember it all. And that's
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So middle circle is just like I've heard other people share. I have contact with family of origin on there. It can be a mixed bag. Telephone calls, actually, and this has been interesting in recovery because program calls are such a big part of recovery. But because of a particular history when I was a kid, talking on the phone can actually trigger dissociative episodes. So I've come a long way with that, and I've taken a lot of healthy risks, but it is still in my middle circle because depending on how I'm doing or who I'm talking to or what I'm talking about, it can be good or not so good. I have multiple addictions. So middle circle encompasses a lot of the stuff that can, my addictions can trigger each other. So if I'm kind of nebulous around money or spending without it being a part of my plan, that can be shame, which can trigger acting out. And I'm off to the races, or it can trigger the intimacy avoidance, where because I'm in shame, I avoid talking to people. And then I used to have stuff around food, but I recently, after years and years of actually my own training and a lot of research and finding a good guide, I had some psychedelic assisted therapy, and that has like completely resolved itself.
Oh, nice.
So I used to have stuff around food if I went for, more than a day without eating, because I used to starve myself to trigger dissociation. So that was in there. So that's what I'm going to remember. I'm not going to try to force. There's more, but I'm not going to try to force it. And then my outer circle, I have a lot of it. It's been really helpful during the pandemic. I have like stations in my apartment, and I cycle through them. So I do puzzles, I play piano, I do art, and my art is not skilled. It's the process, not the outcome. So sometimes I even do art with all the lights off, so I purposely can't see, and I'm just trying to feel and have the experience, and that's really fun. I love walking, and like looking at houses and plants and things like that, smiling at people. That is good for me. Telling the truth, because that's very hard, is outer circle always. Cooking, baking, singing, stuff like that. And all the recovery stuff. I'm a sponsor. I thought about that actually right before I got on the call. I was reading the 12 and 12 to kind of ground myself, and I was putting the book back on my bookshelf, and right next to the 12 and 12 book, I have a book of poetry from one of my sponsees. And
oh, nice.
Oh, yeah. So always interacting with my sponsees. That's a super, super powerful outer circle thing. Yeah.
Yeah. When you just triggered one of my outer circle things is puzzles.
You like puzzles too?
Yes. So my wife and I do a lot of puzzles in the fall, and when it's cold and rainy, we just love sitting there with a puzzle. That's and just the other day, she's like, "It's almost puzzle season."
I love that. Your puzzles have a season. I love that.
Yeah. A lot of ours, the themes are very, fall is my favorite time of year, even though here in California, today is the first day that it's actually been cool. It's been in the 90s, so it hasn't really felt like fall. But a lot of ours are the pictures are nature in the fall or winter, and things like that. And so it just gives us kind of a fun thing to do, something that we can do together. And I've noticed that it's very Zen-like for me, where I can just let all my problems go and just be focused on a puzzle. Most of the time that works. There was one time where it was triggering a lot of resentment with me. Just there was a puzzle that I just sat there for hours. I could not find anything that would connect, and I was like, I need to walk away.
Yep, I have had that happen. There's one puzzle in all the years that I never finished, and I got rid of it because it was not a positive experience. Yes. You got to find your sweet spot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I actually, as part of my outer circle and kind of leaning into being brave, I've been trying to submit more artwork places and have a really good support network for encouraging that. And there's actually a business that female artists can submit artwork to, and then if they get chosen, they make puzzles out of the artwork, and then you get a part of the income perpetually from those puzzles being sold. So there's just another call for art, and I'm trying to get myself courageous enough to submit some of my art.
Awesome. That's fun. All right. So after going over the circles, a lot of times we go through what got you into program. if you're comfortable, you can go as far back as you need to, or you can just, come, right up to the exact events that led you coming into the program. So, there's some people don't like talking about their family of origin. So I don't force anyone to divulge more than they need to, but if you'd like to, share your story of how you got to SAA.
Yeah, sure. So I'm having just a very minor response I know is related to the trauma, just being asked the question, right? I get like this shaking that happens deep in my bones, where it's like I'm cold down to the marrow. So I feel that happening. I think I've always had an erring on the side of oversharing. And I think maybe right now my body is trying to tell me to try to do something different. So even though I am maybe too comfortable sharing origin stuff, there are a couple things that I do feel it's important to say, because in case there are other people out there that have these circumstances, that they're not alone, because it's not typical. Like, not everybody in SAA has this in their history. So the one thing that I'll just say is that I was sexually trafficked as a kid, and it happened through the Catholic Church where I went to school. So I know that there are people all over the world who might have their particular traumas happened connected to religion. That is my story. And so if there's like struggle around steps 2 and 3, I get it. So that's why I'm saying that. So let's leave that at that. I was actually in COSA before I was in SAA, maybe 4 years. I got married, and even before I got married, my partner identified as a sex addict to me, and we ended up going to a healthy intimate relationships meeting, which is something they have in the Bay Area. I haven't found other places, but where people from both fellowships can go. And found at that time it was primarily like a sisterhood. I didn't have a lot of female friends, and so joined COSA and made a lot of really good female friends, and met a lot of their partners because of the HR meeting and just through fellowshipping and stuff like that. At that time, I would say I was mainly in the intimacy avoidance. So I was working on my codependency, but not really seeing that I had an addiction. At one of the conventions, I walked into one of the rooms and thought I was going to a COSA thing, and it ended up being an SAA event where a woman was sharing her story. And that's when it first hit me, like a ton of bricks. Oh, fuck, like I have this too. I remember telling her after she came out of the meeting. And then I think I still didn't go to SAA meetings, but I was there. I knew that I qualified. And then my partner relapsed and started having some really severe mental health symptoms, and was not seeking help and was starting to get a little scary. And so I asked for a separation. And the day I asked for the separation, the very next impulse, the very next thought was to get dressed up and go to a club. And that's how I used to act out. Night after night after night, I would pick up random guys at the club, and sometimes women. It hit so hard. Oh, I'm feeling that shaky again. Yeah. I also, just so much gratitude. I called my COSA friend, who actually has been on your podcast. And she put me on the phone with her partner, who was an SAA. And they said, come over. You're going to stay here tonight, and tomorrow you're going to go to the SAA meeting. And it was the big Saturday morning San Francisco meeting. And it's been this way every fellowship I've entered, right? It doesn't matter how much 12-step I have in my toolkit or what other programs I've worked the steps in, it's so raw and vulnerable and chaotic for me. That first meeting or the first few meetings, I can't think straight. It's terrifying. It's a relief. So I had all of that. So yeah, that's how I got into SAA.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've had both of them on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will not divulge names, but people who know, they know.
Yeah.
So yeah, just thinking about that Saturday 8:15 meeting, I don't think I started attending that until after I'd been at a retreat. And just the energy in that room is amazing. Just, usually more than 80 people at that meeting. I've seen it up to like 120 or something like that, but it's really powerful. And a lot of great long-term sobriety there, and the fellowship is amazing. A lot of people will break off and go have breakfast afterwards and stuff. And so when I was doing intergroup up in San Francisco, when it was there, and also when we moved it to Berkeley, we would make the trek up from the South Bay, go up to San Francisco, spend our time at that meeting, and then head off to intergroup and just have this day of recovery, which was really awesome, but it was a lot of time. So my wife would be a little bit upset that I was spending that much time, but ultimately it was really, really powerful for me to do that.
I can like viscerally remember the feeling, leaving the breakfast joint, having been at the meeting, walked to the breakfast joint and leaving, and just week after week after week feeling like a different human being.
Mm-hmm.
There's a movie about sex addiction. It has a great soundtrack at the end where they're leaving the meeting, and it's like, oh, I know that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling I'm present. I feel like I belong. I feel like I have value. And it propelled me week after week. And I am one of the really fortunate ones that like almost 13 years ago, when I walked into that Saturday morning meeting, that I got sober. I got sober right away. And I don't know if it had been a meeting somewhere else or a different meeting. I don't know if that would have been the case. That was my church. And even when I was in COSA, the step 2 and 3 was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that fellowship, and all those people. And really, for me, a big part of it was seeing, because I was perpetrated against by my dad, by my brother, by the priest at our school, all these older men that were supposed to be kind of something else, not that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So to be in that room with all of those people, but particularly with men doing something different, and healing, paying attention, listening, oh my God, just freaking phenomenal. Yeah. I didn't need to grapple with God so much, because it was like I was experiencing it. I didn't have to think about some image or some idea that made sense to me, because none of it did. But I was experiencing God in that meeting.
Yeah. I came into the room's complete agnostic, just not wanting to have anything to do with the God steps. Mm-hmm. And when I actually got to working the steps and getting to steps 2 and 3, it was weird. I worked step 1 with my first sponsor. He left the program, gave me some readings out of the big book. This was, I think, a little bit before the green book came out. Mm-hmm. so he'd given me these readings, and in between finding my next sponsor, I had experienced retreats, I had experienced meetings, and felt that there was some energy there that I could believe in. My main connections for my higher power are through music and nature, but being at a retreat, being at the 8:15 meeting.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, I got 3 of them around, and occasionally they creep into the recording, so they're back there somewhere. I got one right up on the steps. So so the energy that I've felt at the 8:15 meeting of everyone saying their serenity prayer, there was like one time where I noticed it. We're all, this is back in the day when we could hold hands and be in the same room together. But yeah, everyone saying that the serenity prayer was this, you could just feel the energy in the room being at the retreat. And especially the Friday night meeting, going around the room where everyone does their introductions. And back in the day it was 75, 80, 90 people, and more recently it's been around 200 people. And it just becomes this chant, this thing, and it follows this perfect rhythm of hi so and so, hi so and so. and that was, I could feel an energy there, and then it's greater than myself, and it doesn't have to be rooted in someone else's church. A church that I don't feel connected to in any way. And so that was a revelation to me that I can actually work the God steps in here now without having to worry about whose God it is.
That's right.
It's a wonderful feeling. So I remember just thinking of the old retreats that you were around back in the Santa Cruz days. I remember going to
that swing in the redwoods. So good. They had a swing that was attached way high up in the redwood trees, and it was that like plank seat one, and you could just whoosh, and look up at the stars, the trees. It was incredible.
I remember, I can't remember what the exact workshop it is, but one of my first, it was probably not my first time meeting you, but I know that you had led one of the workshops there, and I just remember that you didn't have a real script, and
it was on higher power. It was on I just went around and had people share what connects them, and then we would do that right then and there. It was so amazing. We went outside and gave people hugs and all sorts of stuff.
I can just cool. be present, be in the moment.
There's so much wisdom in the rooms, and we learn from each other. So I didn't want to try to come up with answers for people or something, or share something I didn't have, but I knew that it was there in the room, what we needed.
One of the last, I think it was the last workshop that I led at our new place up in Marin, was called Everything You Always Wanted to Know About SAA But Were Afraid to Ask.
That's an awesome title.
It was fun, and I had kind of a list of leading questions, but I wanted it to be a conversation thing that we can just kind of go back and forth, and it was really amazing. And most of it took on the notes of healthier sexuality, different aspects of that. We did get right into it in terms of intimacy and sexual avoidance, because being at a retreat was the first time I went to a workshop on sexual anorexia, and I did not identify as an anorexic, but when they started identifying it as avoidant behavior, it's like, oh yeah. And so we had this great back and forth about, what is sexual avoidance and intimacy avoidance. And we just kind of let the conversation kind of go wherever it needed to. I had a bunch of other questions about, the ISO and service structure and stuff. And the conversation didn't go there. So I just let the higher power of the moment dictate where the conversation went. And it was really fantastic. It was my first lead into how we were going to do the podcast. And, are we going to cover this topic? Are we going to cover that topic? And we got into the Me Too movement and things like that. Is this an outside cause or issue? And a lot of people were saying, no, it has real relevance to our program. And so it was, fantastic thing. And I'm hoping, someday soon that we'll be able to do retreats again in person.
Yeah, we are doing our Portland retreat in person. And that was another place where I felt like a lot of higher power. We relied on group conscience a lot. And so much integrity. Is the same feeling I had back in the day when there were still like every meeting had a delegate to mention, and being a delegate and watching people with completely opposing opinions share with such respect, and the value of the collective knowing and how we were able to like come to decisions. And I have been privileged to be on the retreat committee and part of Intergroup here, and being able to experience group conscience and trust it, and trust my own voice in that. I think that was something when I was still living in the Bay Area that I would get too activated to trust myself to speak. Now I can regulate myself. So I can say what I'm thinking or feeling, but I'm not invested in that being the ultimate answer. I'm invested in participating because I too am part of that, the voice of God.
That is interesting. I've had that come up a lot with some of the decisions that our meetings are currently going through. And I have my definite opinion about things, and other people have their definite opinion about things. And we have just watched where the conversation went, and all of a sudden the answer was right there. It's like, okay, that was not me. So
right. Yep.
It was super, super interesting. So I did want to circle back to the DID. Is that what the correct terminology now? Dissociative identity
disorder. Yeah. And there's different versions of dissociating. But yeah, that's what I have. So I have, I'm here kind of speaking as Sarah, but I have a part that's named Lucy. I have a part named Paul. I have a part that I'm not going to talk about because I'm still working on it. But so that happens. Yep.
How did you discover that? Where did that knowledge come from?
Yeah, there were definite signs, feedback from people. I, like so many people with dissociative disorders, I got diagnosed with everything in the kitchen sink. Bipolar, ADHD, depression, PTSD. Like I got diagnosed with everything. So it required a really astute professional. But there were definitely signs. And in the fellowship, I had friends in the fellowship that gave feedback. I had amends that I would have to make for conversations that I thought I had had with them that I had never had, that it happened in my head, but I couldn't tell the difference. Or not calling them back or emailing them back and thinking that I had, or, so what happens is I'll create things that aren't there, and then I won't remember things that were. And that's hard in relationships when it's not diagnosed, when I can't explain it, and I did a lot of covering up. Before I knew what it was, I lied a lot. I lied all over the place, to friends, to work, about I just made stuff up because I didn't know what was happening. And then it's so funny. The phrase I was about to use was the rubber meets the road. And this is hilarious, and you're going to find out why. So the most dangerous thing that started happening is that this was when I was still in San Francisco. I would be driving home, rubber meets the road. I would be driving home and not know where I was. It was the same route I took every day, and I couldn't find my way home. And I'd have to drive around or pull over, or I couldn't get my bearings. So that was the most scary version of the symptoms.
Yeah.
So it was telling a therapist that an assessment was done, and it was another layer of coming out of the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And understanding more the facets of my addiction, because part of my addiction, things that I came across, I found pictures of myself with people. Clearly I was acting out. I was with people at a hotel room or whatever. I had no memory of it. I didn't know who the people were, but I knew I had sex. That I'm pretty sure of, but I had no memory of it. So it put a lot more in perspective, a lot of stuff reorganized. Something that happened early on in recovery that I know can happen for a lot of people, a lot of trauma, is, you stop acting out, and all it's not just withdrawal, it's all the symptoms of the mental health stuff, right? Whether it's depression or flashbacks or whatever, I remember that early on in recovery, nights where I would sleep in the closet because I was so terrified, and didn't know what was happening. So through recovery, I've been able to remember a lot of things. I've been able to trust my body, even if I don't know the facts of the play-by-play, the video version of the movie of my past. I trust how it felt. And I don't, I'm not quite as invested in remembering the details as in listening to my body and taking care of it. And then now just like with my sex addiction, every sex addict has to make decisions for themselves around their own level of transparency and anonymity. But because of I'm in the mental health field, everywhere I've worked, I've told everyone I work with that I'm a sex addict, because I want them to ask questions, because we're not trained on that stuff very much in graduate school and stuff. So ask me, so it's the same thing now with DID. This is why I'm saying it here. There are people out there that have the experience of not feeling real, or one of their body parts feels like suddenly it's too big. Why is my hand so big? Because they're in a little kid part or something, or look at in the mirror and don't recognize themselves, or lose time. Right. And everyone does a certain amount of what would qualify as dissociating, the daydreaming and the numbing out, and addiction is great for that. But some of us have it to a degree that perpetuates the shame if we don't know what's happening and can't get help. So, my level of powerlessness was through the fucking roof, because this wasn't just addict denial. It was actual different ego states, different personalities in me, holding memory, holding agency, that I didn't have a say. I didn't get to decide who was in front running my life.
Wow.
So I've had to lean into the fucking serenity prayer real hard. Because I don't always get to decide.
Yeah. Do you do any meetings, any 12-step work around DID?
Oh yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, so I was at here in Portland we have Second Saturday speakers. I think that's where I was. So I was on a Zoom Second Saturday speaker meeting, and I saw in the name line for one of the attendees. Wait, I'm trying to remember what I saw. I saw something, a label that let me know, oh my God, that person has DID. They're identifying that it said system. So system is one name people use for their many parts together collectively.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I have a system inside, right? So they name themselves as a system. So I chatted with them on the side, like, is this what I think this is? And like, yeah, I have a disorder. Oh my gosh, me too. And they said, well, there's a meeting, an SAA meeting for people with dissociative disorders. And not everybody in that meeting has multiple parts. There's a person who attends they dissociate, they themselves, the one personality checks out, right? Dissociates. And then there are other people who have multiple parts. And it's a unique struggle because, like, for me, for instance, I have a young part who loves SAA, loves the people, the humans that are there, wants to express that, but she's underage. Well, like, I don't let her come to meetings. I mean, she's there, but I don't let her talk. This is a part that I actually have co-consciousness with, so I get to decide it, thank goodness now. But there was one meeting that I really, really trust, and they know my diagnosis. And I made a decision at the end of one of the meetings to let her just say, hey, everybody, like, I love you so much, But at the DID or the dissociation SA meeting, I can bring on my parts. Like, there's an understanding. And people there have female parts and male parts and, parts that don't identify as a gender. And it's really great, like being an SAA, to talk to people who get it. Right?
Yeah. I listen to a lot of, I've mentioned this on a couple of meetings that I've been a speaker at recently, that not only am I a sex addict, but I'm a podcast addict. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and some of them are entertainment, but I do listen to a lot of recovery podcasts, and one of them is about mental illness, and so I do get to hear those stories. But it's so eye-opening to me because I have no firsthand experience with that, and I do know people that have had issues with not being there, dissociating from their body, but not the system, not different parts. And so it's really interesting to hear you speak about that, and that there's an SAA group that
was incredible
that has that as a focus. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is phenomenal. Yeah, I think that there's, just like with sex addiction, right? There can be stuff in pop culture that's so not accurate. And it's the same thing with mental illness. And the DID is, there's a lot about it that's very hard. And it comes from very hard stuff. You have to go through some pretty hellish stuff very, very young for this to be your body's solution. But it's also kind of a superpower. And there's research now out of Harvard that is proving that, like, neurologically, what we are capable of tracking and what we're aware of, what our brain can do, is like a superpower. I know it's what makes, I'm a really good therapist, and I know it's what makes me a good therapist. I have to be careful, and be watchful of it, who's in the room, make sure my therapist is in charge. But the parts are there to keep us alive and protect us. So, I've never had the experience that at my job, I was a danger to anyone, right? Because the parts are trying to keep me safe. So they organize on my behalf. But yeah, if there's real danger, if there's a real trigger, because my tendency, if I didn't have my parts, would probably be to bypass my own boundaries. That's my default because my boundaries were bypassed. My parts will show up. I will get symptomatic. And so, that's part of the healing process, just like with program, right, is recognizing my triggers and having outer circle tools and support people so that I don't have to go down that same path.
Yeah. So early on, you mentioned that you started off in COSA, and you also mentioned working on avoidant behaviors.
Yes.
Do you do any, number one, do you still attend COSA meetings? And number two, do you do any of the intimacy avoidance meetings?
So I don't do COSA or intimacy avoidance meetings right now. I often will go to special events for COSA. Is that fair? Often? I don't know. I do go to COSA events. That'll happen. But I've been this, I think I'm, including COSA, what am I at now? 8 or 9 times around working the steps, maybe. My sponsor and I are focused exclusively on intimacy avoidance. And that has been so life-changing to actually focus completely on that, on the steps. And that's really helped me, the new me that tries to be present and tell the truth. And I don't mean in some assholey way, but like what I'm experiencing, even if it's illogical or unfair or frightened or whatever, to try to say it, because that is the primary way my avoidance manifested, was me not trying to control the outcomes by not sharing my truth. I was going through the gentle path through the 12 steps, right? So that's what I started with in COSA.
Yeah.
COSA didn't have a big book.
Yeah, and they're still working on it.
Yeah. So, and it was in there. I mean, that was, the not telling the truth. I would do all sorts of stuff to finagle and control someone else's experience of me. So as part of my 6th and 7th, well, now I'm on my 8th right now, but this is what I ask for help with constantly. Please, I need help telling the truth. I can see it. I'm at the cusp, It happened just the other day. My DA sponsor is also in this program. There was something that I needed to talk to her about. And I knew I have to do this. This is me sober. It took a lot of prep. I had to do the prep steps to become willing and know what to do and talk to my sponsor about it. And we had a phenomenal conversation. And what I realized was it was more important to me to feel connected to her and to know myself better than it was for me to be right or be afraid. So, I had this story in my head that didn't end up being true. And the only reason I know it wasn't true is because I shared the story in my head.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. My second round through the steps was working on my acting in behaviors, my avoidant behaviors, and so eye-opening. That was the eternal argument that kept coming up with me and my wife. I've stopped acting out, but you still don't want to have sex and you don't want to connect with me, and what's wrong with me? And it's like, it's not you, it's me not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to burst out of this wall of protection that I've built up around myself. And realizing that too had a name and a solution, that working through the steps on those behaviors. Wow, that was that really opened up a lot. And so a lot of my fears have been de-escalating. A lot of the intimacy fears is before. Every time after having being sexually intimate, it's like, why was I so scared of this? But it's just like all the precursors that led up to that, had me just fearful and wanting to put up a wall of protection and isolate instead of connect. And so now I'm, able to be a lot more spontaneous, and it's been, just a real wonderful experience.
Oh, that's so good. It always makes me so happy when I hear people in our fellowship having access to healthy sexuality and healthy intimacy, entering that brave space and being rewarded entering into that brave space. It's so beautiful. Yeah, I've been, for years, I've been doing a lot of work around sex with self. That was a place where the very first time it ever happened, which, I was so sexually avoidant. Like I didn't know anything about my body, really anything. I was like 24, 25, maybe, before I ever had sex with self. And the very first time I did, I got flooded with fantasies that was like the perfect combination of all the ways I was abused. And it was so dark. So that's been a long journey of wanting to grapple with that, not wanting to just avoid. And so much has come from that experience of grappling. I remember people at the Healthy Intimate Relationships meeting talking about praying before sex. And I was like, oh, there's no fucking way. And then through my own sobriety and effort and asking for help and all that, having experiences of orgasm where it feels sacred. It feels sacred of what my body is capable of doing. It's beautiful. It's exciting because I'm not in that dark fantasy. I'm present in my body to the sensations. And then recently I was trying combining meditation with sex itself. And I realized that, so I've never orgasmed with anyone else before. That's part of my avoidance. And it's deep, right? It's not something I can decide to do, right? The body has a say in that. So, but what I realized was I don't know. I had, I think, a story about what was scary about that, but I actually didn't know until I knew what I was actually afraid of. And I don't know how it is for men, but in my female body, it's a struggle. It's effortful before it's enjoyable, right? It's work. And that efforting, that work it's bordering on painful, not ouch, like a pinprick, but it's so hard, marathon painful, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I realized. That's the intimacy I was avoiding. Somebody seeing me in that place. Not the face I make or the sound I make or what I look like when I'm experiencing the pleasure. It was somebody being there and witnessing the struggle and witnessing me in that version of pain. And I think that that's enough of it in and of itself, but I also know that it's connected to abuse, and that, the abuse was purposeful pain. And very, there were multiple people around, right? So it was voyeuristic, and it was purposefully painful. So of course, right, once I could see that and realize it, it was oh my gosh, so much compassion and acceptance. Well, that makes sense. What a reasonable thing to be afraid of, right? Because that association, and it was just so nice to have that clarity and to be willing to do the work, to be present and uncomfortable, to know the truth rather than the stories I make up or we fill empty spaces with all sorts of horrible things. So if I don't know the actual reason, I'm going to create something horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when I was first writing my first fourth step, writing the fears that were coming up around intimacy, and one of them that came up was erectile dysfunction, where I got in my head, and that was enough to make me want to pull back. And my kitties are still making noise there. Yeah. But yeah, just the labeling that fear and using the other steps to kind of work through it, and to ask my higher power to help with that, and let go of the outcome. And so not be so concerned, because with the intimacy avoidance, there were times where we would just be emotionally distant for months, and trying to reconnect. I would get up in my head, and that would cause the erectile dysfunction, which would make me want to distance myself further. And so that cycle keeps perpetuating itself. And once I was able to, I don't think I actually did like a prayer before sex, but there were definite things. I like I mentioned, music is a higher power for me. So having music that eases me into being intimate, that was enough to let go of the fears that were starting to rise, and allow my body to relax, allow me to be emotionally present. And there were times where things didn't happen, and being okay with that, and non-judgmental, when it opened up a lot of communication between me and my wife, and just the judgment that I felt, the judgment that she felt, and just coming to this new understanding really opened up a lot, and helped me kind of work through my stuff, help her work through her stuff. And now, like I mentioned, I'm able to be present, and not have that fear of that sense of adrenaline that would come to rush throughout my body whenever she mentioned wanting to be intimate. And just I can remember years and years ago where that flood, I can feel my body change, and it's like, I'm gonna do something else tonight. I'm gonna play my guitar and just avoid that altogether. And now when she mentions it, it's like, yeah, I can be there. And that has been a wonderful gift of working through intimacy avoidance, working through fears, steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, really helping, letting those fears go, and allowing me to be present in my body.
That's so fantastic, man. It's these moments we were talking about earlier about like this different version of higher power, and like I feel like I'm, I don't want to say triggering words to people, but I'm saying it to myself kind of humorously, like you're preaching the gospel, It's like this is like, this is beautiful, right? It's the sobriety is just the beginning, right? I mean, there's so much more possible once we get sober, and using the tools that got us sober, and the support networks and things like that. And you're just, this is it. That's the stuff.
Yeah. And then we can share our knowledge that we have with the world, especially here in a forum like this.
That's right.
Yeah. Kind of taking our stories out of the shadows, so to speak.
Exactly.
And trying to break the stigma around it. And that's why I really appreciate you talking about the DID is, breaking that stigma and allowing us to talk about it and recognize it and work through it.
Yeah, along those lines, something else I'm feeling like my own value system come up around talking about, and I'm not in your fellowship anymore in that area, so I don't know what the process has been there, but a couple things that come up for me. One is, when I was when I was working in Chicago, I was there for a few years. I was living up near Wisconsin in like rural suburb. And there was a SAA meeting there. There were a couple very white, cis, Christian, older men.
Yeah.
And I, every time I introduced myself, I used my pronouns and shared my inner circle. And I'll tell you, I have a sponsee that is family to me. This person, well, gosh, one of my sponsees, I was there for the birth of her child. I never thought I couldn't have kids, so I never thought I would experience that. And she lost her mother when she was a teenager, so I got to be there for the birth of her son. But my other sponsee is going through this phenomenal sacred transition, and I know that there was something in them that, not only that I was the only person who wasn't the cisgender, straight white male that was meeting, right? So not that this person had a lot of options finding a sponsor, but like we found each other, and it's been a huge part of the recovery process to be working the steps around the transphobia in the world and their experience of it and how that has affected their sex addiction. And oh God, it's just, I feel, that it is sacred. It is sacred, the journey that this person is on. I also, I've used the steps a lot around dismantling my internalized white supremacy. So I joined this weight accountability group. I don't know how many years it's been now, but, and I bring step stuff there a lot. And I use my 10th step around the stuff I'm working on, the white fragility and the exceptionalism, all those qualities, right, that the soup I swim in, to take an honest look at it. Where am I not conscious? That's what the 10th step has helped me, where am I not being honest with myself? Where am I avoiding action? Where am I avoiding a difficult conversation? Where am I not looking at how I am the same as this in ways to this other person or this group of people that I have so much judgment for, right? It's like, where have I been the same? And yeah, it's like a perfect pairing for me.
Beautiful. So we are closing in on our time. Are there any other things that you wanted to discuss?
One thing, just the last thing is the importance of meditation in my life. And that too has been a journey, just like the spirituality. I've had a lot of struggle because of, religious authority and experience of that, of like diving into learn from a specific teacher. I went to Spirit Rock once a month to do Kevin Griffith's Buddhism of the 12 Steps. But I only once ever talked to him. And I told him, because most of the people there were in AA or NA, and we talked about that after one of the meetings. I said, I'm an SAA, I'm a sex addict, and I don't know if that changes anything about your guidance as far as meditating. And he said, yes, it does. He said, I work with people with sex addiction, and what I would recommend is loving kindness meditation for yourself and only yourself for the rest of your life. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to end with.
That is fantastic. Well, I thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast, and all these years later, talking about the inception of the podcast at a retreat and actually finally being able to do it and record it. This has been an awesome experience for me, and I'm so grateful that you were able to take some time out and have this wonderful chat.
Yeah, and thank you for making this happen. I think sometimes when there are things that we're good at, we can devalue them. And when there are things that we're not as good at, that other people are good at, we can think that that's the way to be. So I don't know whether you can take this in or recognize it as, because it might be something that you just have a gift for, but it's a gift. Like, this is a gift and it matters. And I'm really grateful. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful. I appreciate it. It was so great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. All right.
All right, take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Sarah again for sharing her story with us on the podcast. It was a lot of fun catching up with her. After the recording, I asked if she wanted to include any information about the DID meeting on the podcast. And she let me know, since it's been changing times based on who's attending, the information isn't really posted anywhere, but she gave me her email address if anyone was interested. And for anonymity's sake, I've decided to withhold her actual email address here on the podcast. But if you would like information for the meeting, you can email me direct at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'll be happy to share her information. Just thinking about email, we did receive some feedback through the feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com address, and I wanted to read that here before closing out the episode. And I'll read this anonymously. I've just recently started coming to the rooms of SAA after over 10 years of being in AA. Your podcast has been a vital tool in my understanding and education of an addiction that I have never addressed. I literally have completely compartmentalized my addiction to the point that I believed it didn't exist. Needless to say, there's been a lot of self-discovery over the past month. So thank you for what you and the Bay Area are doing with this podcast. It has helped me tremendously. And on behalf of the Bay Area Intergroup, you are very welcome. We've been getting a lot of stories like this, people finding the podcast and getting a lot out of it. Thank you again for writing in. There was a little bit more to that email that it was on a more personal level, and so I'm not going to read that here on the podcast. So if you feel like sharing some feedback here for the podcast, go ahead and email us at the feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com address. And that's going to wrap up this episode. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.